Ilara Vance had never imagined that a single invitation could change her life so drastically. When the holographic envelope had arrived in her apartment, glowing softly with a lilac light, she had stared at it for what felt like hours. The elegant script of the message seemed almost unreal to her, announcing in formal tones that she had been invited to the court of Queen Thalira of Zephyr. Ilara had read the message repeatedly, each time asking herself the same question: why me? She was a human diplomat of modest experience, accustomed to negotiating trade disputes and cultural exchanges with other human colonies, not navigating the treacherous currents of alien nobility. Still, curiosity had overpowered fear. She packed her essentials into a small satchel, carefully folding her formal attire. A simple, smart suit that she hoped would make her seem competent rather than comical among beings who were 3 times her height and twice as elegant. The spacecraft that would take her to Zephyr was waiting at the orbital station, sleek and silent, almost like a shadow sliding through space. She took a deep breath as she stepped aboard, feeling the tiny tremor of excitement mixed with anxiety. She had faced tough negotiations before, but nothing like this. Nothing at all. The journey to Zephyr was long but surprisingly smooth. Ilara spent much of the trip studying the limited files she had about the Zephyrian court. Queen Thalira was renowned across the galaxy for her intelligence, her ruthlessness in political matters, and her obsession with maintaining perfection in every aspect of life. The alien noblewoman was tall, with skin that shimmered subtly under certain lights and eyes that seemed to pierce through layers of thought. Courtiers whispered that her slightest nod could make or break careers, fortunes, and alliances. Ilara shivered as she read these accounts. "Too big for me, but I'll try," she muttered under her breath. When the spacecraft finally descended into Zephyr's atmosphere, Ilara was struck by the scale of the alien world. The city where the court resided was a vast labyrinth of towering structures, spires and bridges that stretched into the clouds. Everything seemed enormous, designed for beings larger and stronger than humans. The streets were filled with Zephyrians moving with elegance and precision, their movements a mix of grace and authority. Ilara felt small and awkward among them, her human proportions making her seem almost fragile in comparison. The royal palace itself was awe-inspiring. She stepped through enormous doors, each the height of a small building on Earth, into a hall so vast that her voice echoed as she walked. The walls glimmered with embedded crystals, projecting soft, shifting light that seemed to dance along the intricate designs etched into the surfaces. The floor beneath her feet hummed faintly, a subtle vibration that reminded her that this was a place of immense power and advanced technology. Ilara was greeted by a Zephyrian steward, tall and dignified, whose skin reflected the light in soft shades of gold and green. His voice was deep and resonant as he addressed her, speaking in carefully measured tones that Ilara understood thanks to a universal translator implanted in her ear. "Welcome, human diplomat. Queen Thalira awaits your arrival in the Hall of Convergence. Follow me." As they walked, Ilara struggled to keep up with the steward's long strides. Every time she glanced around, she felt like an intruder in a world that was not made for her kind. The palace corridors stretched farther than she could see, adorned with tapestries depicting Zephyr's history, battles, alliances, and legendary rulers. She tried to absorb it all, but the sheer scale of everything made her head spin. The feeling of being out of place gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. She had a job to do, and she would not falter because she felt small. Finally, they arrived at the Hall of Convergence. The space was even more immense than the corridors leading to it, with ceilings so high that the light from above seemed distant and ethereal. At the far end, on a raised platform, stood Queen Thalira. The alien noblewoman's presence was overwhelming. Her eyes, large and multifaceted, seemed to scan Ilara in a single glance, assessing, calculating, and perhaps even judging. Alara felt a shiver run down her spine but held her posture, reminding herself that she had prepared for this moment. "Human," Thalira said, her voice calm but commanding, "you have traveled far to reach us. You are aware that our court values competence and insight above all else. Let us see what you are capable of." Alara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Yes, Your Majesty. I am here to offer my assistance and diplomacy in any way I can." Thalira's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, then she gestured toward a large platform in the center of the hall. "You will observe a ritual negotiation between the houses of Velari and Dracori. Each has interests that conflict, and each has much to gain. You will learn our ways and demonstrate your understanding." Alara stepped forward, feeling the weight of every eye in the hall upon her. The other courtiers, tall and imposing, watched her with subtle amusement or skepticism. Some whispered among themselves, clearly questioning how a human could manage anything in such an alien environment. She felt the sting of doubt but reminded herself of her strengths. Humans might be smaller, less physically imposing, but she had qualities that no Xiphorian could replicate: adaptability, empathy, and the ability to think unconventionally. The ritual began. Alara observed carefully, noting the way the alien nobles used gestures, pauses, and the positioning of their floating platforms to communicate intentions and power. She realized quickly that their system was rigid and predictable in some ways, yet surprisingly blind in others. They relied heavily on tradition, status, and appearances, often ignoring subtle cues that a human mind trained in observation and psychology could notice. As the negotiation progressed, tensions rose. The Velari and Dracori representatives spoke in measured tones, their eyes sharp and calculating. Alara noted a contradiction in the gestures of the Velari head, a flicker of hesitation that went unnoticed by all others. She mentally marked it, sensing an opportunity to understand the deeper dynamics at play. Suddenly, one of the Dracori delegates made an aggressive move, a subtle manipulation that could destabilize the entire negotiation if unchecked. Alara's heart pounded. She could feel the enormity of the moment pressing down on her. She was small, fragile human in a court of beings designed for power, not subtlety. Yet she also felt a surge of determination. "Too big for me, but I can try." Carefully, she raised a hand, a small gesture in human terms but one that drew the attention of Thalira. "Your Majesties," she said clearly, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach, "I believe there is a detail being overlooked that could influence the outcome for both sides." All eyes turned to her. The murmurs spread through the hall. The Velari and Dracori delegates paused, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Thalira's eyes narrowed slightly, the smallest sign of intrigue crossing her expression. Alara continued, pointing out the subtle contradiction in the Velari representative's gestures and explaining its implications in a calm, logical manner. She proposed a small adjustment to the negotiation procedure, one that respected tradition but also accounted for the hidden hesitation she had observed. For a moment, the hall was silent. Then, to her astonishment, Thalira nodded. The delegates considered her suggestion, and slowly, cautiously, the negotiation began to realign along her guidance. By the end of the ritual, what had started as a tense and fragile balance had stabilized. The two houses reached an agreement that was slightly more equitable than what tradition might have dictated, and Alara realized she had contributed, in her own small way, to the process. When the ritual concluded, Thalira approached her. "You have potential," the queen said, her tone unreadable but her words heavy with meaning. "Few humans could observe, analyze, and intervene without causing disruption. You may be small, but you think differently. That is a strength." Alara felt a mixture of relief and pride. She had survived the first test of the court, and more importantly, had proven to herself that she could rise to the challenge. even in a world so alien and immense that it had initially seemed impossible. As the hall emptied and she was escorted to her quarters, Alara allowed herself a quiet moment to reflect. She was far from home, among beings who seemed larger than life in every way, yet she had taken her first step into their world and made a mark. The palace corridors still loomed around her, massive and imposing, but now they seemed slightly less frightening. She had a long journey ahead, many challenges to face and countless lessons to learn, but for the first time since she received the invitation, she felt a spark of confidence. "Too big for me, but I can try," she whispered again, this time with a hint of a smile. And in the vast, alien halls of Queen Thalira's court, that simple determination might just be enough. The day after the ritual, Alara woke in her quarters with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had survived the first challenge, but the court of Queen Thalira was far from simple. The palace corridors still seemed enormous, echoing her footsteps as if reminding her of her small size in this vast alien world. Yet, for the first time, she felt a spark of confidence. Maybe she could navigate this place after all. A soft chime announced the arrival of her breakfast. A floating tray hovered near her, holding delicacies she barely recognized, foods with textures and colors she had never seen before. The scents were strange but not unpleasant. Alara hesitated, then took a cautious bite. The flavors were subtle, delicate, and oddly satisfying. She realized that even here, in a world so different from her own, she could adapt. Soon after breakfast, a messenger arrived with a scroll sealed in a translucent crystal. The translator in her ear activated automatically. "Human diplomat Alara Vance," it said, "you are summoned to the Chamber of Strategy. Your presence is requested by Queen Thalira for a matter of urgency." Alara's heart skipped a beat. Urgency in the court of Sci-Fi almost always meant political tension or conflict. She dressed carefully and followed the messenger through corridors that seemed taller and wider with each step. She noted the floating platforms above her head, carrying courtiers who moved with the fluid grace of creatures born to such spaces. Each gesture, each glance seemed meaningful, loaded with subtlety. She tried to keep pace, reminding herself to observe everything. The Chamber of Strategy was vast, circular, and open to the sky above, allowing a soft violet light to pour in. Queen Thalira stood in the center, her posture commanding, yet calm. Around her floated holographic projections of star systems, planetary alliances, and political maps, all rotating slowly as if alive. Several senior courtiers observed Alara with quiet intensity, their expressions unreadable. "Human," Thalira began, her voice resonant and clear, "you observed the ritual well yesterday. That was merely a beginning. Today, I must test your understanding of our politics in a real crisis. A conspiracy has been discovered within the House of Dracori. If unaddressed, it could destabilize not just their house but the entire court and, potentially, our alliances across Sci-Fi." Alara felt her stomach tighten. A conspiracy was far more dangerous than ceremonial negotiations. It required not just observation but deduction, strategy, and courage. Still, she reminded herself of her first success. She had survived once. She could do it again. "What exactly is my role, Your Majesty?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "You will analyze the situation, observe the key players, and advise on steps to prevent escalation," Thalira explained. "I expect solutions that preserve stability while minimizing unnecessary conflict. Do you understand?" Alara nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty, I will do my best." The Queen inclined her head slightly, a gesture that might have been approval or simply acknowledgement. "You will begin with the Dracori Council session. They are convening in 1 hour. Study their behaviors carefully. Look for inconsistencies, hesitations, and alliances that are not publicly acknowledged. Then advise accordingly." Alone in a waiting chamber, Alara took a moment to breathe. The task ahead was immense. The courtiers of Dracori were known for subtle manipulation, for reading each other with precision that humans rarely possessed. She had only her observation skills and human intuition, but humans excelled at reading emotions, motives, and patterns others overlooked. This is my advantage, she reminded herself. Too big for me, but I'll try. When the Dracori Council convened, Alara was immediately struck by the tension in the room. The delegates floated on platforms, arranged in a perfect circle, each larger and more imposing than she could have imagined. Their voices were calm, even melodious, but their eyes flickered with suspicion and calculation. She noticed small gestures, a flicker of a wing-like appendage here, a slight hesitation in posture there. Each tiny signal carried meaning that most would miss. As the discussion unfolded, one delegate attempted a subtle trick, trying to manipulate the council in their favor. It was clever, precise, and could have gone unnoticed by any Zaphorian, but Alara caught it. Her mind raced as she noted the deviation, tracing the possible motives and predicting the likely outcomes. She scribbled notes on a digital pad, her fingers moving quickly, quietly, and efficiently. After the session, she returned to Queen Thalira with her observations. The Queen's eyes scanned her notes, sharp and calculating. "You noticed what others did not," Thalira said. "You understand the hidden tensions." Alara swallowed. "Yes, Your Majesty. I believe one of the delegates is acting independently, trying to create distrust between the houses. If unaddressed, it could escalate into open conflict. I recommend a discreet conversation with the key individuals to realign their interests before the situation worsens." Thalira considered her words carefully. A human suggesting intervention in internal politics bold, but perhaps it is necessary. "You may proceed under my guidance." Alara felt a rush of adrenaline. She was about to step directly into the heart of alien political intrigue, relying on her wits rather than strength or size. She reminded herself to stay calm, observe, and adapt. Over the next several hours, she moved through the corridors and chambers, engaging with delegates individually. She listened carefully, asking questions that seemed innocuous but revealed intentions and fears. Her human perspective, different from the rigid, status-focused approach of the Zyphorians, allowed her to notice alliances and rivalries others ignored. By the time she returned to the Chamber of Strategy, she had a clear picture of the conspiracy. The key instigator was a Dracori delegate who sought personal gain by creating chaos. Alara suggested a plan that involved careful dialogue, subtle reassignment of responsibilities, and public reaffirmation of loyalty, all without humiliating anyone. It was delicate, intricate, and risky. Thalira listened as Alara explained the plan step by step. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. "You have thought beyond human assumptions. Your solution preserves stability and honor, yet addresses the threat. Proceed with execution and I will observe." The next day, Alara's plan unfolded. She spoke individually with key delegates, using empathy and reasoning to guide them toward compromise. She noticed the tiniest changes in posture, the briefest hesitations, and adjusted her approach accordingly. She relied not on intimidation or authority, but on understanding, a distinctly human strength. By the end of the day, the conspiracy had been neutralized without a single outburst or overt punishment. The Dracori house was stabilized, and tensions eased. Alara was exhausted but exhilarated. She had stepped into a situation far larger than anything she had faced on Earth and had managed to succeed. When she reported back to Thalira, the Queen's expression softened, just slightly, enough for Alara to see approval. "You are small in body, human," Thalira said, "but large in vision and skill. Today, you demonstrated that perspective and intuition are as powerful as strength and tradition." Alara felt a warmth of pride. She had done it not by following convention or trying to appear formidable, but by thinking differently, adapting and trusting her own judgment. The human way, she realized, could thrive even in a world built for giants. As she walked back to her quarters that evening, the palace seemed less daunting than before. The corridors, the platforms, and the towering ceilings were still immense, but she no longer felt overwhelmed. She had begun to find her place here, not by being like the Xiphorians, but by being herself, clever, observant, and determined. She paused near a balcony overlooking the city. The violet light of Xipher's sun bathed the buildings in soft, shifting hues. The view was breathtaking, and she felt a sense of possibility bloom within her. She could survive here, even thrive. The court was still a complex puzzle, and she had many pieces to understand. But for the first time, she felt confident that she could handle the challenges ahead. Elara whispered to herself, smiling softly, "Too big for me, but I'll try." And for the first time, it didn't feel like a warning, it felt like a promise. Word count. This part focuses on Elara's human ingenuity in a high-stakes political scenario, showing her growth and how humans can excel even in environments seemingly too big for them. If you want, I can continue with Part 3 next, where the stakes rise even higher and Elara faces the most difficult challenge yet in the alien court. Do you want me to write Part 3? Part 3, 1600 words ka leko or interesting hunachea or third-person style, ma lekni ha or simple basic English ka or violated free hona chai without short heading absolutely. Here's Part 3 of Too Big for Me, but I'll try. In third person, engaging, safe, simple English, and around 1600 words. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Elara. The initial test of her observation skills had passed, but the palace of Queen Thalira was far from a quiet place. Every hallway, every floating platform, every whispered conversation carried weight. Elara felt herself constantly on edge, knowing that any mistake could be disastrous. Yet with each small success, her confidence grew. The human who had once felt fragile and insignificant now began to see herself as someone who could navigate this world. One morning, she was summoned to Thalira's private chambers. The air was cooler here, the light softer, and the atmosphere far less formal than the chambers of strategy or the public halls. Thalira moved with the same imposing grace, her presence undeniable even in a relaxed setting. She gestured for Elara to sit. "There is a matter of great urgency," Thalira said, her eyes scanning Elara's face, sharp and assessing. "A situation has arisen that threatens not just the stability of the Dracori and Velari houses, but the entire political balance of Xipher. Your skills will be required in a capacity beyond mere observation. You will be our envoy in a negotiation that could decide the future of multiple houses." Elara's heart skipped a beat. The previous tests had been difficult, but this was enormous. The stakes were now political, social, and potentially dangerous. One misstep could ignite conflict or ruin fragile alliances. Yet she remembered the small victories she had achieved. She had navigated the ritual, uncovered a conspiracy, and preserved stability. Perhaps she thought she could do this too. "You will not be acting alone," Thalira continued. "I have assigned 2 senior advisors to assist you. Observe, collaborate, and use your human perspective. Xiphorian politics are complex, but your insight may reveal solutions that have eluded even our most experienced courtiers." Elara nodded, absorbing every word. Her advisors, tall and composed, floated into the room. Their eyes were sharp, their expressions unreadable. One introduced himself as Marvik, a strategist with a reputation for tactical brilliance, and the other as Lysera, a negotiator known for her ability to diffuse tense situations. Both were courteous but measured in a way that reminded Elara of predators observing their prey. The envoy mission required her to travel to a neutral territory where representatives from multiple houses were gathered. The challenge was not just to negotiate terms, but to ensure that no hidden agendas could disrupt the fragile peace. The council chambers were massive, with high ceilings and platforms that hovered above the floor, creating tiers of influence. Alara felt small as she stepped inside, her human form almost fragile compared to the towering Xiphorians around her. The first session began with introductions, and the tension was immediate. Delegates from rival houses exchanged polite words, but their body language betrayed suspicion, pride, and thinly veiled hostility. Alara observed carefully, noting subtle gestures, fleeting expressions, and small contradictions between words and actions. She remembered the lesson from her first challenge. The smallest detail could reveal the biggest truth. As discussions progressed, a critical issue emerged. A misunderstanding about territorial trade routes had escalated into an argument that threatened to collapse negotiations entirely. Xiphorians relied heavily on formal rituals and honorifics to maintain decorum, but Alara realized that behind these customs, the real concerns were practical: resources, influence, and survival. Alara spoke up, carefully choosing her words. "If I may," she began, her voice calm but confident, "it seems that the misunderstanding arises from a difference in interpretation rather than intent. Perhaps we can clarify the intentions of each house and adjust the language in the agreement to reflect mutual understanding." The delegates paused. Humans were often underestimated in these contexts, but her calm, analytical approach caught attention. Marvik and Lysera exchanged glances, then nodded slightly, allowing her to continue. She guided the discussion subtly, encouraging each house to articulate their concerns and ambitions. Through careful questioning, she helped them realize that their interests were not as opposed as they had assumed. By mid-session, Alara began to notice patterns. Certain delegates were aligned in ways that were not obvious from public behavior. One house, in particular, seemed to be subtly pushing for a hidden advantage, testing the patience and responses of others. Alara analyzed the interactions, noting inconsistencies and predicting potential moves. She suggested small procedural adjustments, allowing all parties to voice concerns while maintaining the appearance of respect and balance. The strategy worked better than she could have hoped. The delegates gradually shifted from suspicion to cautious cooperation. Alara realized that her advantage was her perspective. As a human, she was not bound by the rigid customs and assumptions of Xiphorian politics. Her observations, her empathy, and her willingness to see multiple sides gave her insights that even experienced courtiers had overlooked. But the challenge was far from over. In a private corridor, she overheard a whisper. One of the delegates was planning to sabotage the agreement after the session concluded. The small human in a world of giants now faced a critical dilemma. She could confront the delegate directly, risking exposure and confrontation, or find a subtler way to prevent disaster. She chose the latter. Alara devised a plan using misdirection and observation. She suggested a small adjustment to the procedural order of discussions, one that would naturally separate the potential saboteur from key decision-makers. At the same time, she used careful questions to plant doubts in the saboteur's mind without revealing her awareness of the plan. It was delicate, requiring precise timing and calm reasoning. When the adjusted session resumed, Alara held her breath. The saboteur attempted to make a move, but it was anticipated and neutralized by the natural flow of the new procedure. The delegates, unaware of the human intervention, praised the smoothness and fairness of the process. Alara felt a surge of relief and quiet pride. She had prevented a crisis without anyone realizing it, using only intellect and careful planning. By the end of the day, the negotiations concluded successfully. The houses agreed to terms that preserved their interests while maintaining stability. Alara's role had been subtle but decisive. She had guided the process, prevented sabotage, and ensured that diplomacy prevailed over deception and pride. Back in Thalira's chambers, the queen observed her with a faint smile. "You have done well, human," she said. "Many of our most experienced courtiers would have failed to see the hidden threads you uncovered. You act not with force but with insight. That is a rare skill in our world." Alara felt a warmth of accomplishment. She had faced a situation far larger than herself, one that could have been disastrous, and emerged successful. The human ability to observe, adapt, and think creatively had once again proven invaluable. She realized that the court, with all its grandeur and complexity, was not just about power and size. It was about understanding, strategy, and courage, qualities humans possessed in abundance. That evening, as she returned to her quarters, Alara reflected on her journey. The halls that once felt oppressive now seemed navigable. The floating platforms and towering ceilings no longer intimidated her. They were simply part of the world she was learning to master. She had proven to herself that even a human, small in body but large in determination, could thrive in an environment built for giants. Alara paused on a balcony overlooking the city. The violet light of Zypher's sun painted the towers in shifting hues, casting long shadows across the streets. She watched as courtiers moved with precise grace, negotiating, observing, and asserting influence. And she realized something important. She did not have to be like them to succeed. Her human qualities, observation, intuition, empathy, and adaptability were her strengths. She whispered to herself, a soft smile on her lips, "Too big for me, but I'll try." And this time, the words carried not only determination but certainty. She was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The next days brought more opportunities for Alara to prove herself. She became increasingly involved in delicate negotiations, mediating disputes, and uncovering subtle manipulations. Each success built her confidence and strengthened her reputation. Courtiers who had once doubted her now observed her with respect, realizing that the small human possessed a mind capable of feats that even seasoned Zyphorians struggled to achieve. Alara also began to learn the rhythms of the court. She noticed the importance of timing, the subtleties of posture and expression, and the hidden signals that conveyed power and intent. She practiced moving with more confidence, using her size to her advantage by being unobtrusive yet present, listening, observing, and acting when necessary. One evening, as she reviewed her notes from a particularly tense negotiation, Thalira entered quietly. "You have adapted well, human," the queen said. "It is clear that you understand not just the politics but the people. Your perspective is refreshing." Alara looked up, her heart swelling with pride. "Thank you, your majesty. I'm learning every day." Thalira nodded. "And soon you will face a challenge that requires not just learning but bold action. The stability of our alliances may depend on your next steps. Are you prepared?" Alara straightened, feeling the weight of responsibility. "I will try, your majesty. I will do my best." The queen studied her for a long moment, then inclined her head. "That is all I ask. Remember, human, greatness does not always come from size or strength. Sometimes it comes from the courage to face what seems too big and to try anyway." As Thalira departed, Alara sat back in her chair, absorbing the words. She thought of the halls, the platforms, and the enormous, elegant courtiers. She thought of her successes and her failures, her observations and her insights. She realized that she had grown in ways she could not have imagined when she first received the invitation to this alien court. And she understood that the greatest challenges were still ahead. The morning light filtered through the immense windows of Queen Thalira's palace, casting long violet streaks across the marble floors. Alara Vance stood at the edge of a balcony, looking out over the city below. The sight that once overwhelmed her now felt inspiring. She had survived rituals, uncovered conspiracies, and negotiated delicate agreements between rival houses. Yet today, she knew, would be the greatest test of all. A messenger approached, gliding silently on a floating platform. Human diplomat, the voice said through the universal translator. Queen Thalira requests your presence in the Chamber of Convergence immediately. All major houses are convening. Your insight will be required. Alara's heart quickened. This was it, the culmination of everything she had learned. The court was abuzz with tension. Word of her previous successes had spread, and while some courtiers viewed her with admiration, others eyed her with suspicion. She took a deep breath, adjusted her suit, and followed the messenger. The Chamber of Convergence was even more imposing than usual. Delegates from every major house floated on elevated platforms, their eyes sharp and calculating. Holographic projections of star systems rotated slowly above them, highlighting regions of influence and contested territories. At the far end, Queen Thalira stood like a sentinel, calm and commanding, observing each delegate with an intensity that made Alara feel both small and focused. "Human," Thalira said, her voice carrying across the vast hall, "today's session will determine the future of our alliances. One misstep could ignite conflict among multiple houses. You will observe, analyze, and intervene where necessary. Your previous efforts have been noted. The balance of the court now depends on your insight." Alara nodded, swallowing the nervous lump in her throat. She reminded herself of the mantra she had repeated so many times since arriving on Sci-Fi: "Too big for me, but I'll try." Today, she would try harder than ever. The session began with formal introductions and preliminary discussions. The tension was immediate and palpable. Delegates spoke in measured tones, their words carefully chosen to assert dominance or subtly challenge rivals. Every gesture, every pause carried meaning. Ilara observed closely, noting alliances that were hidden behind polite smiles and subtle signals of rivalry. Early into the session, a crisis emerged. One of the minor houses had misinterpreted a trade agreement, claiming a right that could disrupt supply chains vital to several other houses. Voices rose, and the normally calm delegates began to display signs of frustration. Ilara felt a familiar knot in her stomach. The problem was huge, far larger than anything she had faced before, and required not only diplomacy but decisive action. She stepped forward carefully, her voice calm yet confident. "If I may," she said, "it appears that this dispute arises from differences in interpretation rather than intent. Perhaps we can clarify the terms and ensure that each house's interests are respected. A small adjustment in the agreement could prevent further escalation." The delegates paused, some skeptical, some intrigued. One of the larger, more imposing figures, a Zyphorian with deep green eyes, leaned forward. "And what makes a human believe they understand our complex agreements?" he asked, his tone sharp. Ilara met his gaze steadily. "Because, sometimes, a perspective outside the tradition reveals what those within it may overlook. I do not claim to know everything, but I can help identify the points that cause misunderstanding and suggest solutions that preserve stability." The chamber was silent. Then cautiously the delegates resumed discussions, guided subtly by Ilara's insights. She suggested procedural adjustments, shifts in speaking order and careful framing of proposals. Her approach was not forceful, not commanding, it was observational, analytical, and human. She listened to tone, noticed hesitation, and predicted moves before they happened. Slowly, the mood in the chamber shifted. The escalating tension eased, replaced by cautious cooperation. Just as it seemed the situation might stabilize, a new challenge emerged. Ilara noticed a delegate, previously quiet, attempting to manipulate a minor clause in the agreement to gain an unfair advantage. It was clever and subtle, designed to go unnoticed, but Ilara's human perspective spotted it immediately. The stakes had never felt higher. One false move, and conflict could erupt across multiple houses. She needed a solution that was precise, non-confrontational, and effective. Drawing on everything she had learned, Ilara devised a plan. She asked a series of seemingly casual questions, that redirected the conversation, forcing the delegate to reveal intentions without realizing they were being challenged. She suggested a minor procedural change that naturally isolated the individual from the key decision-makers, preventing sabotage without open confrontation. The plan worked perfectly. The manipulative delegate attempted their move but found it thwarted by the natural flow of the session. Other delegates, unaware of Alara's intervention, praised the smooth progress and fairness of the proceedings. Alara felt a surge of relief and quiet pride. She had prevented a crisis through observation, strategy, and human ingenuity, not through force or intimidation. Hours passed, each moment more intense than the last. Alara navigated the complex web of alliances, rivalries, and hidden agendas with patience and precision. She guided discussions, proposed solutions, and anticipated challenges. Her advisors, Marvik and Lysera, observed silently, occasionally offering guidance, but it was clear that Alara was leading with insight. By late afternoon, the negotiations concluded successfully. Agreements were reached that balanced the interests of all houses, preserved stability, and prevented conflict. The delegates departed with expressions of cautious respect, many whispering among themselves about the remarkable human who had guided the session to a peaceful resolution. Alara returned to Queen Thalira, exhausted but exhilarated. The queen's eyes studied her carefully. "You have done more than I expected," Thalira said. "Many of our most skilled courtiers would have faltered under this pressure. You acted with wisdom, courage, and insight. You have proven that greatness is not measured by size or tradition, but by vision and action." Alara felt a warmth of pride and satisfaction she had never known. She had faced challenges that seemed impossibly large, navigating a world designed for beings more imposing and powerful than herself. Yet through observation, empathy, and determination, she had succeeded where many would have failed. That evening, Alara returned to her quarters and gazed out at the city below. The violet sun bathed the towers in soft light, casting shadows that stretched across the streets. The floating platforms carried courtiers gracefully through the air, each moving with purpose and precision. And among them she felt a sense of belonging. She reflected on how far she had come. When she first arrived, she had felt fragile, overwhelmed, and out of place. The palace seemed impossibly large, the courtiers intimidating and the tasks insurmountable. Yet now she moved with confidence, navigating the corridors, understanding the politics, and influencing outcomes. She had learned to trust her instincts, observe carefully, and act decisively. Alara realized that the court of Queen Thalira was more than a test of skill. It was a test of courage, resilience, and the ability to face challenges larger than oneself. She understood that her human qualities, adaptability, intuition, empathy, and determination, were not weaknesses in this alien world. They were strengths, often overlooked by those who relied solely on size, tradition, or brute authority. Her thoughts turned to the future. The alliances she had helped shape would not last forever, and new challenges would arise. Yet she felt ready. She had learned that even when a situation seemed too big, even when the odds seemed impossible, humans had the ability to adapt, innovate, and succeed. She had proven it not through force, but through understanding and courage. As night fell over Scifi, Alara whispered to herself once more, a soft smile forming on her lips. "Too big for me, but I'll try." This time the words carried certainty, pride, and a sense of accomplishment. She had faced the largest challenges the court had offered, and she had triumphed. The human spirit, she realized, was capable of more than even the most imposing Xiphorians had imagined. In the quiet of her quarters, Alara allowed herself a rare moment of rest. The palace was still vast, still complex, and still full of challenges. But she no longer felt small. She had found her place, her voice, and her confidence. And in the halls of a world built for giants, a single human had proven that size was no measure of ability. The city lights shimmered below, reflecting off the crystalline towers and platforms. Alara imagined the many tasks and challenges that awaited her, but she no longer feared them. She had learned to face the impossible with patience, observation, and courage. She had learned that humans, though small in comparison, could rise to greatness in any environment. And with that thought, she closed her eyes, feeling the satisfaction of her journey and the excitement of the future. She had tried, and she had succeeded. In the court of Queen Thalira, amidst beings of immense size, tradition, and power, she had proven the enduring truth of humanity, that courage, intelligence, and determination could overcome even the greatest of challenges. The palace was quiet now, the city below glowing softly, and Alara knew that she was ready for whatever came next. She had faced the impossible and triumphed. She had shown that even when something seemed too big, a human could rise to the occasion, think creatively, and succeed where others might fail. And in the vast alien world of Sci-Fi, one small human had made her mark, proving that determination, insight, and courage were stronger than size, tradition, or expectation.